Well, hello, White Sox fans, and welcome to another edition of the MLB FutureSox podcast / stream. My name is Ian Eskridge. Tonight I am joined by Nick Murawski, Danny Miller, and tonight as a special first-time guest, Elijah Evans. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing great. Yeah, here we are, man. Pitchers and catchers reporting. Feels good to feel good.
Yes, indeed.
Good to be here. Appreciate you guys having me on, and excited to get ready for baseball season. It feels like we're finally here.
Oh,
Yeah, same. This time of year is one of those times it's a favorite for a lot of people, right? Unless, of course, you're a fan of the White Sox, and you're not as diehard as some of the folks in this room are. Yeah, I should say the White Sox and maybe, I don't know, Oakland. But yeah, good to be here. Good to be talking about baseball, man.
Yeah, good to see you guys. So we've got pitchers and catchers reporting tomorrow. There's already been the smattering of pictures amongst the Twitter timeline, which has been nice to see. Some interviews and nice to see everybody down there and getting ready for the season. I guess I'll open this thing up with, we've got a bunch of battles, I guess I would say. How much of a battle is it really when you've got a bunch of guys whose statistical worst year was last year, battling it out for spots on the roster? But there are some interesting things going on with the NRIs. I guess I'll open that up with the NRIs. Is there anybody in particular that you guys are looking forward to see? I figure we'll break down and just take a real brief snapshot of each guy after this conversation. Nick, why don't you go ahead and start? Is there somebody in particular you're looking forward to checking out?
Honestly, it feels just like a bunch of bodies, thrown up against the wall, and like we'll see what sticks. I mean, this off season kind of felt like, quantity instead of quality. Like, let's get as many guys in. Obviously, depth has been an issue for the Chicago White Sox for a while. That has been addressed. What strength of depth we have, that's a whole nother question. Like, you can have depth, but what's the value of that depth? I'm not joking around here. I like Danny Mendick. When he went down in that injury with, I think, Haseley, tore his knee up, he was cooking. Whether he was going to do that, for the remainder of the season, doubtful, but it just felt like things were kind of unlocking for him. He can play multiple positions, and in a year where we don't anticipate a ton of great things happening, it'd be great if he caught on again and he's healthy, and we can find somebody that maybe even more than a backup at times. So it's fun to have him back. In my perspective, I joke around about TW all the time because that's just from my Hawk upbringing, but he's a guy that I'll be paying attention to and just checking in on him. But some of the arms, obviously we need to figure out, where our bullpen is at, and those types of setup guys, those types of situational pitchers, they emerge sometimes out of nowhere. So I always looking in on the pitching depth.
Danny, let's go down the line. Anybody in particular for you?
Well, so here's my thing. For years and years and years, we've been talking about what's going on in right field, right? And last season, we kind of figured maybe they got something figured out. We pretty much heard for months before spring and opening day came along that Oscar Colas was going to be the guy, and that didn't really seem to work itself out too much. So, again, here we are, 2024, and right field's a question. But they made some moves to try to get better defensively. That's just been kind of the focus all off season this year. But my thing is looking at the 40-man roster and the list of infielders that are on the 40-man right now, and you're going, what does our infield look like? I mean, the only thing that you can pretty much slot in is Yoan Moncada is, how long as he's healthy, is going to be the starting third baseman, and Andrew Vaughn is going to be the starting first baseman unless he goes down with some kind of major injury. But then you look at the smattering of names that goes across the rest of what's on the 40 man, and the middle infield, there's kind of least some question marks. Obviously, they went out and the big off-season signing this year was Paul DeYoung,
Dong.
and then Nicky Lopez, and for a while there, we just assumed that those guys were going to be the two up the middle. But there's still Lenny Sosa that's out there. There's still Popeye Rodriguez is on the 40 man. Braden Shoemake, who they picked up. There's this whole smattering of names, and none of them really jump off the page. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of really wanting to see what's going to happen there. Who's going to stay? Are any of those guys going to stick for the entire season? I don't know, but I guess spring training numbers really don't mean a whole lot, right? But when you're looking at a White Sox 40 man that looks like this one, it might actually mean something this year. I don't really know where Pedro's head's at. I don't think a lot of people know where Pedro's head's at right now.
That is fair. Elijah, as a fellow minor league guy, where your focus is a lot on minor league stuff, who are the guys that you're looking at currently to possibly make a run at something here?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious choice is Nick Nastrini. We've seen what he's capable of down the stretch last season. He came to the organization, was good in Birmingham, was solid again in Charlotte, had a few more issues in Charlotte, but generally speaking, this is a guy who's advanced. He looks pretty ready to be at the highest level of baseball. It's going to come down to how much he can command, and it's going to be interesting to see, in his bullpens and then in spring training games, how much he's able to locate within the zone, especially with his fastball and his changeup. That's really what's going to be the deciding factor for him. I think because of all the veteran starters, the Sox might hold off on bringing him into the opening day rotation and choose to kind of have him be the next man up the second that somebody struggles or goes down with an injury. But I think Nastrini is the most exciting in terms of somebody that could actually benefit the team this coming season. If I was the team, I would really give him a shot to earn a rotation spot, because I do think, aside from Dylan Cease, he's probably the second highest upside pitcher in the organization right now, honestly, in terms of being ready right now. And then, you look at the other side of thing, and there's some interesting young pieces. I think Fraser Ellard's a guy that's super under the radar, but as we talked about, the bullpen is super up for grabs. Ellard was really solid in the Arizona Fall League, and he's someone that, from watching him last year and then being able to talk to him a little bit, he could be a real piece in the bullpen. I think he's a left-hander, and the Sox, could use the left-hander after trading Bummer. I think there's really an opening in probably about 5 of the bullpen spots, honestly, in terms of a combination of the non-roster guys and the other guys that are on the roster. So I think Ellard's someone who, with a good spring, given his age and his experience in the minor leagues, could honestly crack the team or be up pretty soon. And then on the offensive side, I don't think there's a ton of players within the organization that are going to push for roster spots yet. But of course, it's going to be exciting to see, the Colson Montgomerys, the Edgar Caro, and a lot of the other pieces who, will be up in the near future, probably not quite yet. But there's other players to watch there that deserve the chance to be at Major League camp.
Yeah, agreed. There's so much just apathy for the roster at this point. I mean, there's the couple of guys that that we expect to stick around from previous years. Yoan Moncada, Eloy at DH possibly. Because none of those guys ended up getting traded, and that is what it is. And we'll see what the NRI guys. I wouldn't say that there's the minor league guys that the White Sox invited to camp. Those guys, some of those guys, obviously, I'm interested in. The other guys, I don't know. Am I interested in Brett Phillips or Chucky Robinson? Not particularly. I don't really expect either of them to even be with the organization after spring training, to be honest.
I guess I missed the assignment on that question, by the way, talking about the 40 man, huh?
Well, I mean,
roster invites.
Those guys are going to be at spring training as well, and they did add some of those minor league guys as non 40-man roster invitees. So there are some. So I don't know.
Can I interest anyone in Rafael Ortega? I think there's a world Ortega could be a fourth outfielder. That's another guy that, at least stands out to me a little bit. I think, like you said, a lot of the non-roster invites are not all that exciting, but Ortega's someone that I could see. He had a stint with the Cubs where he looked like an MLB player for a little while, so I could see him cracking the roster given the situation in the outfield.
Yeah. I mean, I guess probably if you're really looking at things, the most interesting battle out of all these guys that are recent minor league additions, obviously the addition of Kevin Pillar is going to be an interesting one. But when you look at his, at his stats, I mean, we're going back several years now where the guy hasn't put together really, any numbers to speak of per se. And, the only thing that really jumps out on the page to you about Kevin Pillar is versus left-handed pitching and him being in a platoon spot. And, Danny, when you speak about the right field debacle and the fact that they picked up Dom Fletcher from the Diamondbacks, possibly that is a decent pairing for him in somewhat in a platoon. But, again, health is obviously a concern as well. So, yeah. So, anywho, sorry, trying to work on this connection stuff over here on this side. So, if we are looking at this bullpen battle, if you can call it a battle, they've today they just added two more names to pile onto this whole thing in Dominic Leone and Corey Knievel. Knievel didn't pitch last year, had a capsule tear in his shoulder. I don't. He's, I understand that they signed him and that it's, a position that we all see that there's going to be a need in the bullpen. But do you guys see anything coming of this Knievel signing at all? Knievel?
No, not really.
Nothing. I mean, none of these things get me terribly excited. Again, it's just, I can't. What arms can we bring in? Does anybody have any background maybe on these arms? Maybe they check in with Bannister and Cat, and I like what I've seen or I've heard good things. It's worth bringing somebody in. You never know. A different organization, a change of scenery. We've heard all that kind of stuff before. I mean, it happened last offseason. I feel like that was, a guy like Gregory Santos came in, right? And wow, what an explosive arm. And he ended up being real nails for the Sox. Again, I thought he was going to be traded at the deadline. So, sometimes it's just, hey, this guy's got an arm or he's got something. It just hasn't worked out in a previous environment. None of those names, though, nothing's really getting, like, jumping off of the page. Like, wow, this has got to be where this guy's going to fit in. There's a little clarity, I would say, over the last day or so over Kopech and Crochet in my mind. It definitely seems like Kopech, is in that starting rotation, and Crochet's been working through the offseason and building himself up for the starting rotation. But, he's kind of left it up to the organization and what have you, where he's going to fit in. Almost like an Eloy Jimenez. Like, I want to be out in right field, but I'm willing to do whatever is best for the team. Crochet clearly wants to be a starter.
Yeah. The Chris Getz comments about Crochet possibly being a starter. I talked about it briefly with James on the stream last night. And does anybody of this group think that Garrett Crochet has any shot at being a starter in the major leagues without at least spending the majority of a season in the minor leagues.
Can't see it.
Yeah, I don't
just
know that he's, they can say he's been working all season to get himself stretched out, and I know that, they've been kind of force feeding us the rhetoric, I want to call it, that Garrett Crochet is going to be a major league starter for this White Sox team this year, and I just don't see that happening right out of the gate. We're talking about a guy who
what do you
hasn't
have
been
to
fully
lose,
stretched
though?
out.
Like
A
I mean, what do
solid
you?
left-handed arm.
Yeah, destroy his
Yeah,
arm, basically.
I understand that, but if they say, look, we agree, and we fully support the program that you've put in the off season. We don't know how long he's been doing this. We don't know how he's built up in the off season. Everything's kind of kept quiet. If they say, we like what you've done, and you're showing it off in spring, I mean, I don't, I just don't understand, like, why not? Why not this year?
Is there a world where you run 6-man rotation and have him be kind of an opener? I think that's maybe a possibility. I could see a world where you have him be the 6th starter and he goes 3-4 innings in that start as the opener to a more of a bullpen game, or even the 5 starter in a 5-man rotation and just assume he's going to be more of an opener than a full starter. I think that's maybe the way you make it happen, but I almost would rather see him. I don't know. I mean, you can go with the route of him in the minor leagues and just let him be a starter, develop as a starter, have him be ready to be a starter next year. Or I think you could also just have him be a bullpen guy who's just your multi-inning guy in the pen, and just you get to that time. And I don't know. In my opinion, I don't really see him being a starter. I'm just not sure I can buy it after the last few seasons. So I almost would rather him just be a multi-inning reliever.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it either. I'm shocked that we're having this conversation, but like, if he checks all the boxes and it like works for them and they trust, I'm like, well, then go ahead. But I'm in denial that this is actually going to happen. It's just we've been hearing so much about it that, well, where there's smoke, there might be fire here. This might actually happen.
Yeah, I only have one thing I want to add to that. One of the biggest things that, and Ian and I have talked about this, back in the White Sox daily days, and we've talked a little bit about it here since coming over to FutureSox. But the thing with Garrett Crochet is after his Tommy John and he came back, he never got the velo back like he was before. He was 101, 102, and just throwing BBs up there and just beating guys with your pure power. And he comes back from this Tommy John surgery and he's averaging 95, 96 miles an hour on the fastball. And we saw him get touched up quite a bit. And the problem is his fastball doesn't move at all. He throws it straight as an arrow. He's got, we compare him to Zach Birdie, and what everybody
Yeah.
expected from Zach Birdie as a closer. And that was Birdie's thing, was once the velo kind of dipped just a little bit, there's no movement on the fastball and he gets touched up, against major league pitching or major league hitters, excuse me. And my thing is if Garrett Crochet is going to be successful in either role, he's either got to have an uptick in the velocity or he's got to find some movement on the fastball, because he's just
I
not
mean,
going to beat anybody with
it
straight as an arrow ball.
is it really that different from Michael Kopech? I mean, if you really think about it, it's Kopech. Kopech's velo is way down from where it used to be. I don't see him having the stamina to be a full-time starter, and he doesn't have enough movement on his fastball for it to not get around all the time at the current velocity it's at. I mean, I think you're almost in the same position with him. It's different because Kopech has at least been starting the last few years, but the way I see it, I don't really get it with either of them. I think it's kind of holding on to this like elite prospect like pedigree that they both had, where it's like, oh, these guys were supposed to be the guys, so let's just try and make them the guys. When in reality, both of them are probably better as relievers, and both of them will probably end up being relievers at some point.
My thing with Kopech, and we kind of touched on it last week, is the lack of control. There's no way you could put him in right now in the 6th or 7th, maybe even the 5th in a jam. Well, from what we've seen right now, if he changes completely this spring and his control is lights out, and the organization says, you know what, with what we've brought in and what we have to work with, and the lack of a bullpen, maybe you should be in the bullpen. But I got no faith in him coming in with guys on, and because you can't figure it out. Danny mentioned you got to face three guys. When you come out of the bullpen, where as a starter, it's like if you're a little shaky in the first or something, and we've seen this from other guys. Okay, then you might be able to find your footing, and for the next 3, 4, maybe into the fifth, because that's the way we work these days in MLB. You can settle in. He doesn't have that luxury to like try to settle in, out of the bullpen. The Crochet thing, it's the mentality of like you're not a thrower anymore. You're a pitcher, man. You're just not going to be able to just go triple digits. You have to learn the craft of pitching. You've got to be able to throw 3 pitches, with confidence at any point. Keep people off balance. You can't just, Matt Thornton, Zach Birdie, whoever you want to talk about, that is throwing straight, they're throwing hard, and it gets hit. It can get timed up. So, look, I don't even know why the organization would talk about Crochet in the starting rotation unless there's been a lot of like due diligence already. It's just odd. It's odd to me. It reminds me do a little bit of like right field stuff. Remember how much they talked about Colas last offseason? And like, we were getting pushed Colas by Hahn, and everyone was like, really? Do you really think he's just going to jump right and be our starting right fielder? And okay, he didn't hurt himself in spring, but he ended up being, your right fielder pretty much. Not on, opening day, but.
So, yeah, the whole starting pitching thing to me is kind of weird. And as you alluded to, Elijah, with the multi-man, the 6-man rotation and stuff like that. The only problem that I see with that scenario is that you still have Dylan Cease here. If Dylan Cease had been traded, I could see them going to a 6-man rotation and giving a guy a start every 6 days. But when you have Dylan Cease here, I can't imagine that they're going to go to a scenario like that when you've got a guy like that on the starting staff.
Yeah, it just feels like beyond Cease, you've got 9, 10 guys who could be starters and none that you feel confident in. So yeah, Eric Fetty, sure, he's your number 2 right now going into the season because he signed a $50 million deal. Awesome, cool. He might pitch like he did in Korea. He might be like he was with the Nationals. So you never know. I'm not totally bought in on him. I think he's changed a lot and he looks solid, but you're in a situation where the majority of the rotation is just total question marks. So that's why, like, part of me is like, again, I would have traded Cease this offseason, and clearly the package hasn't been there because I don't think the team doesn't want to trade him. I just think there hasn't been an offer on the table. When you look at what the Orioles ended up giving up for Corbin Burns, I would have been really upset if that was the package for Dylan Cease. So at the end of the day, I get keeping him because of the situation, but it kind of hinders some possibilities to a degree, like you were just saying, with the rotation, because you've got a lot of question marks in this rotation, and they're going to have to figure out what the most creative and logical usage is of this pitchers to make a rotation that looks good and to figure out who's part of the rotation moving forward, because I'm not sure that anybody in the current starting rotation is pitching for the White Sox in 2 years from now.
That's
Nicky,
a great point, actually, right at the end there.
I mean,
Yeah.
Nastrini, right? Nastrini, that's the one guy, but he's not even in the
Yeah,
rotation.
I don't even know if I see him coming up at all this season, to be honest with you. I'd like to. I don't feel like there's any need to rush Nastrini at this point. Especially with the offense is going to look like this season, and given the predictions that the White Sox are probably not going to win more than, I may even be generous here saying 75 games. I just don't see a reason to bring up Nastrini, right?
But it's
there's no reason to rush him.
I know the Sox aren't good, but I think you can't focus on him being brought up or not because of them being good. I think you bring him up because he's ready or not, and he's 24 years old and has been productive and had really good chase mate rates and stuff in the minor leagues. So I'm not saying you rush him, and I don't think he'll make the opening roster, but I think he's at least a near ready pitcher that you can put in the rotation at some point this season and have someone to watch that you actually think is a piece of the future, as opposed to most of these pitchers who are probably just, 1-2 season options that maybe one hits and is good.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I could see Nastrini making a run. The only thing that I kind of struggle with here is that, like we said, there's like 10 guys that are vying for 5 positions if you're going with a 5-man rotation, and you're probably going to do that with Cease. So you've got Cease and Fetty are definitely going to be 2 of the guys. And then after that, then you have to figure out, you've got 3 remaining spots. You've got Kopech. You've got, to a lesser extent, you've got Toussaint, you've got Schultens, you've got like basically just a bunch of guys. And like you said, Nick, like who knows what you're going to get out of Kopech. And, do you, with this offense, when you're going to be throwing guys out there on the mound, do you, we've talked about this several times, that if the White Sox are losing, say 3-2, and that's how they're losing games. And, like you said, Nick, you want to see competent baseball. You want to see them not kicking the ball around. If that's what you get, and, the pitching performances are up to par, then great. I don't know. It's just like you said, do we have, it's a bunch of guys that you don't have confidence in. So
Well, I think then that's what you look at this season, perhaps, as you go into the season almost in a weird spring training type of mentality of you can compartmentalize, forget the wins, losses. Where is this team looking in 2025 and beyond? And how are the performances that are happening on this ball club? Like, how is it helping for the future of the White Sox? And if they lose some heartbreakers, but hey, there are some arms here that are really performing well that we know are going to be around, I'm okay with it. If things are lacking somewhere else, but we're getting some offense from guys or defense from guys that there's a future, at 35th and Shields. That's how it's going to have to be. That was like 2017, 2018, 2019, right? It's the game within the game within the game. Just don't look at the, wins, loss. Like, you got to really be paying attention in certain situations that, I hate to say it, is what 2025 is going to be like.
Yeah. And that's why I, as a prospect following person, and because of that logic that you're describing there, Nick, bring guys up. I'm not saying rush guys, but if people are ready and they're at an appropriate age where they've shown enough that they need to show in Birmingham and Charlotte, go for it, right? A Jonathan Cannon, for example, another guy at Major League Camp, right? Doesn't have a super projectable ceiling, but his floor is there. He throws 5 pitches, he mixes and matches, he has good location. If he's getting results in AAA mid-season, sure, give him a rotation spot. I'd way rather see that than continue to watch Toussaint and Schultens and all these other guys who I don't know are anything, right? So this is the year of growth, and I've talked about this many times with like everybody I know in the White Sox world. Like, this is about figuring out who's part of the 2025 roster. So when it comes down to it, figure out who looks the best out of camp. Figure out some guys you can identify as players you can flip at the deadline if they're performing in terms of those veteran non-roster guys, right? And then bring guys up when they're ready, and bring guys up maybe a little bit aggressively, right? I think the days of hesitating on prospects are kind of over. I mean, look around Major League Baseball right now. You've got 21, 22-year-old guys that, if they're showing that they're ready, are coming up. Yeah, they might take a bit to adjust. I mean, Jordan Walker last year is a good example of someone who got a ton of hype, came up, was not ready, needed a little more time. Second half of the season, looks like a future, middle of the lineup guy for the Cardinals going forward. There's players like that in the White Sox system who, yeah, it might be a little hard at first, but the second half of the season should be focused on those players.
All right, so here's a question, and this is something that I know that I've talked to Danny about a couple of times. So they've been saying that they don't want to rebuild, they want to retool. And we all know, looking at this roster, that this is I can't necessarily say it's 100% a teardown, but when you've got a bunch of guys that you signed and are only on 1 year deals for the most part, even, I mean, like Yohan Moncada, you're not going to keep him past this year unless he has MVP type numbers. Eloy, same deal. But you've got all these guys that you traded with to the Braves, in getting, Nicky Lopez and, you got Paul DeJong. I mean, you got like all these guys that are just here for 1 year. And if you know that this is going to be a lost year, personally, I've heard a lot of people say that they're gonna riot if it's a full teardown type rebuild. But realistically, last year we saw one of the worst seasons in baseball all time when it comes to offense and when it comes to, I mean, we're not talking Cleveland Spider levels here of win-loss record, but it was very bad. So what is the point in getting these guys that are all, for the most part, all below replacement level in Major League Baseball and forcing them all onto the field in order to, I don't know, maybe get an extra couple of ground balls and commit a couple less errors? I'm just going to open that up to you guys and let you guys run with that.
Yeah, I want to hear from Nick on this one. This is Nick's specialty here.
I mean, I just, in terms of the verbiage and retool, reorganization, I don't understand why we're so afraid, and it's not us, it's the organization, just to come out and say it. Say rebuild. And, I think the fans are forgiving. We're forgiving, I think, culture maybe. I mean, if you just come out and say it failed, this is a rebuild. Now, there are variations of rebuild. We can define the word rebuild, but the fact of the matter is whatever was happening before did not work. Okay. I'm not, we all watched it. We all witnessed it. And we've got to reimagine. And that means it's going to have to be a rebuild from culture, from personality to how we play baseball. So, look, the draft is not going to help you if you tank. You're not going to be, you're not going to be in that number one spot, that top 5 spot. So it frustrates me that they've kept the payroll low. It's and everyone talks about, well, they're going to spring for the off season, next year. Maybe, maybe they won't. We've been down this road before. Don't tell me in August and in September that you're going to be a competitive ball club and that because you're in the AL Central, you don't have to do much. Are you pandering to the ticket holders? Are you pandering to the fans who are not stupid? If you've been paying attention, you can see right through all of this. Okay. I just want a little bit more honesty because, hey, he's provided some depth. I can't lay all of Han's faults at all at his feet. For me, I can't make a real judgment on Getz. He hasn't done anything like gutsy. So it's been a disappointing offseason all around. I mean, the Athletic came out with the grades. I think it was like a D, which they earned it, and probably they could even gone lower. So I get really bent out of shape when we have to define what's going on and define rebuild. Like, just have some guts and just, it is a rebuild. This is what's happening with this organization. Trust me, get behind me. We're going to change it. Be here when we do. I don't know. Should I be working for the marketing department over there?
Yeah, I don't know. And before anybody else really says anything on the subject, I just want to add one question to kind of piggyback on what Ian threw out on the table there. And he says that all these folks are going to riot if it's a full teardown. And my question is how is it not at this point? Like you're saying, if Yohan doesn't have an MVP type season, or if Eloy doesn't have a similar type of season, And then, they've been shopping Dylan Cease all off season, whether or not the package has been there. How is that? How are we not in full teardown mode?
And how are you
The
not
writing's on the
rioting
wall.
already? I mean, it's like if you're not
Right.
fuming mad over what has gone on over the last couple years and the just complete and utter collapse and failure and mismanagement and how they've almost malpractice. I mean, organizational malpractice. If you're not fuming, I'm sorry, but getting rid of Dylan Cease and even shopping Luis Robert Jr. around, is he ever going to see a new stadium, if they go to the South Loop? I mean, that's another question, but I'm sorry. Again, define a full teardown. Are you getting rid of everybody that was on the Sox? Are you getting rid of Eloy, Moncada, Kopech, Cease, just completely taking care of anything that was in the Han, world? Is that a full teardown?
It,
To me, I mean, a rebuild is a rebuild. You're having to start all over again, and that's what they're doing.
I think it's interesting. I agree with Nick to an extent because it is a rebuild. That's the reality. It's a rebuild. But I also, maybe this is me being just falsely optimistic to a degree, but I kind of am sick of this narrative of like everybody just being angry all the time about the organization. And I get it, right? Like it is, like they've made some really bad decisions and the organization has totally screwed up what should have been an era of competing. That's the reality. Okay, let's accept that and let's focus on what we have because the offseason goal this year, while it hasn't been a good offseason, it hasn't been exciting, the offseason has been about, whether they admit it or not, it doesn't matter what they admit. The offseason has been about, let's see what our next generation looks like and try to develop a culture of fundamental baseball. I know that's just a trigger word, people don't like it, whatever. And
There's
let's
the C
focus on
word.
this next generation. I know, whatever. And let's focus on this next generation and see what we have over the next year to start to prepare for the next era in 2025. And I know that's not exciting. I get it. But there's just no reason to continue
Elijah, you
to
are
be upset.
right. You are right on that. And if I think we would all as fans would have stomached that if it was said in August or September by Getz, right? Just came out and just said it.
I agree.
Let's take care of this right now. And I'm just gonna tell you, he's big on the whole I don't like our team. And
There it
Getz,
is.
there's been articles recently about how Getz has been very upfront about pitching pitching free agents didn't want to come to the organization because the defense was suspect. He's being open and candid about a lot of things. I wish, to your point, Elijah, he would have said that from the
I agree.
get-go. It would have alleviated a lot of this, eliminated it really.
I just think you don't need to hide behind the curtain of a team that hasn't succeeded, right? Like that, you're right. The team failed. The rebuild that we all expected from 2016 when we traded Chris Sale all the way up until 2021 when you made the playoffs and you got smoked by the Astros, that rebuild did not work. Like that is the straight facts of this. That core that came from the Quintana trade and the Sale trade and the Eaton trade and all those players, right? That didn't work. That's the reality of Chicago White Sox baseball is you spent 5 years on a rebuild that failed. So right now, right, pivot. There were some good trades at the deadline. There's some good prospects that have been drafted. The last two draft classes looked a lot better than the few years prior to that. Mike Shirley's done a really good job developing the farm system in a way that we haven't seen in the past. The past was getting farm system players by trading assets and by acquiring prospects. Right now, you're seeing a lot of homegrown talent that's doing well in the White Sox system, in addition to players that were brought in last offseason and last deadline. So just embrace that. Just go with it. Say, this is the era of White Sox baseball. We're focused on 2025. This is a year to try and figure out who you have for the future. We're going to continue to bring up prospects. We're going to watch all these players in Kannapolis and Winston and Birmingham make their way up to the big leagues in the next year or two. And that's our next rebuild, and that's our next era of White Sox baseball, because that is the reality, whether they want to admit it or not.
So what do you say then? I 100% agree that this is the year, especially after last year, and knowing that it failed, and you've got these expiring contracts coming in next year. So my issue with this whole thing is that when you look at all of those circumstances, why then bring in a bunch of guys on one-year contracts to quote unquote reestablish the culture when you've got a bunch of guys that are like pretty much at that point right now where they need to be able to go up to the major leagues and get some consistent at bats to see if there is anything there. You need to get some pitchers up there that are not just placeholders and are guys that are pushing that line, like a Nastrini, like a Jared Schuster, hopefully, as was mentioned by Wolf Larson earlier. It would be nice to see Schuster get an opportunity out there. And Bannister and Katz have found some issues with his delivery that were causing him issues last year. I mean, we're talking about a guy who was Atlanta's #1 prospect. This is the kind of guy that should be getting meaningful innings for the White Sox if they can
#1 prospect
figure out,
in a stacked system.
Well, I mean, in a stacked pitching system anyway.
Right.
You saw what kind of happened in a small sample size with Grifol and Corey Lee and Oscar Colas. I don't think he handled those situations very well. And I'm wondering if Chris Getz, in conversations with Pedro Grifol, said, what kind of team do you want? Do you want veterans on this team? Do you want guys that, you've got a track record with, or are those the type of guys that you want to be around, or do you want to have a lot of youth this year? I'm just trying to, I don't know. The question that you had, and I really don't know. And these are the games that you play. And I'm wondering if Pedro said, you know what, I want some veterans. I want some guys that, and that's the route that it went. I don't know.
Yeah. So what? So he wants a bunch of veterans so they can run his clubhouse for him, like he was hoping was going to happen last year.
I don't think
so. Why is he still here? Is my point.
I don't think it's as much about that though as I'm not sure it's just about having veterans to be in the clubhouse. I think what you have to do as a rebuilding team to an extent is not all the young players are ready, right? So Nastrini, I think, is a guy who should get run soon. But there is a lot of spots on the roster with players who still need some time in the minor leagues, right? Even a Colson Montgomery, right? Like, let's take Colson for an example, right? Like, he's not ready to be the big league shortstop. No. He's incredibly talented. There's no reason to rush him. So you're in a position where not only do you have to wait for him, but in the meantime, you have the opportunity to test some guys out and flip them if you need to. And if they perform well and they're a veteran, like take a Kenyon Middleton, for example, last year, right? That was a non-roster invite, made the bullpen, was really solid, returned to Juan Corella, who is a top 30 prospect for me right now within the system. Sure, Juan Corella might not be anything, but if you're waiting on those prospects, why not take some veterans in that you could maybe flip for something if they play well in the first half of the season?
That is fair. I just the thing that I wonder about is cramming the entire roster filled with a roster full of players of that ilk, So I just want to run through the NRI guys for the bullpen that we were speaking of all these guys to get away from all of the yelling and the anger and all of that stuff for a little bit. So we got Justin Anderson, mostly minor league stuff. He was in the Royals org in 23, which is
you
good.
Don't say.
Yeah, but he did have a 1.47 whip across 3 levels, which is not great. But he was, that was over 3 levels, and most of that was in rookie ball last year. He had around a 1 whip in AA and AAA last year, so he might be somebody that might be able to, at least push for significant time, at least in Charlotte, if nothing else. We have Joe Barlow, who went the Alex Spees route of being claimed off the Rangers roster by the Royals. Stop me if you've heard this before. 79 games with Texas since 21, and he's put up a 1.07 whip with a 3.05 ERA. And one of the things that I'm starting to see here as kind of a pattern is that he is 61% slider and 36% fastball. Jake Cousins, 3 seasons with the Brewers. Last year, okay, not great. 1.39 whip with a 3.08 ERA for his career. Last year, 2.14 whip. So, again, one of those guys who last year statistically had his worst year of his career, but he's 54% slider and 29% sinker. Chad Kuhl, worst year of career last year. He is a spot starter, possibly a long guy. But last year, mitigating factors, he had, what was it, his right foot, his push off foot, it was metatarsalgia, which is just a fancy way of saying that he had, the balls of his feet. There was something that was sore on his push off foot. So obviously that's not going to lend itself to pitching very well. But he is 43% slider, 35% sinker. He throws a knuckle curveball. You got Jesse Chavez, who I have to think is pretty much a shoo-in for the White Sox bullpen. I mean, is there any way that this guy doesn't make the club? Last year, he was a 1.10 whip with a 1.56 ERA for the Braves in 36 games. Now, he's in 144 batters faced last year, 26 hits and 12 walks. Not too shabby. He throws cutter most of the time, and then he throws a sinker. So it's 50% cutter, 30% sinker. And
probably taking a Sergio Santos type role with the White Sox this year, I'm imagining.
Definitely see that. And then you've got Dominic Leone, who was picked up today. Giants Bannister connection. The best year of his career was in 2021 with the Giants under Bannister. I think he had he had a 1.10 whip that year and a 1.51 ERA. He's kind of splits up evenly between his fastball, his cutter, and his slider by his pitch metrics. I don't know if Bannister is going to go in and start tweaking any of that. We know that that's one of the things that he's really good at, is trying to find one spot where, he finds that somebody's going to excel, or the situational, pitching thing. Then you got, Knebel, we talked about him earlier. Wasn't even in baseball last year, so I don't even see that happening. And then you've got Jake Woodford. Has been down with the Cardinals, and he's actually not been too terrible. And he's the one thing about him, 85th percentile in ground ball percentage. So he does throw a lot of ground balls. Kind of fits with Getz's defensive manifesto. 50% sinker, 22% sweeper, and he's got a 7-pitch arsenal. So a lot of, as Bannister said, things that he wanted to see was a lot of different looks. So we're seeing that. So the issue is, are any of them going to be good enough to make it? Your thoughts?
Elijah, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll get going here with the pen. I mean, like I said earlier with a Middleton last year, I do think this is an area where you can just kind of see who has the most upside, who could actually be solid, and then who could we flip at the deadline for a prospect and a throw-in and just see what happens. Because the reality is very few of these players really have a chance to be meaningful for the future at all. I think, like you said, Chavez, even at his really, really old age, I believe, will be in the pen. I think Leon will have a decent shot. I think there's a handful of guys that are fun. Fun marginally, I guess, and could make the roster. And ultimately, I think most of these players are just, you give them a shot. If they're solid, you flip them at the deadline. You maybe re-sign one or two guys to a one-year deal, whatever. But I also want to see some of the younger guys getting a shot. I think an Alex Spees should get a shot. I think by the end of the season, I think there's a good chance Jordan Leisure is the closer for the White Sox, to be honest. I think Leisure is a guy who I really want to see. Prelander Baroa, just acquired, from the Mariners. Baroa is another guy that should, despite the command problems, should get a shot at some point. So it really comes down to, who do you want to start the season with on your roster? A few of these guys. You figure out which ones look the most tradable, basically, and you bring those guys into the season. And then as you either cut guys or trade guys, depending on how they perform, then you bring up the Baroa and the Leisure and the Spees and even the Fraser Ellard, like I mentioned earlier, because there is some fun young arms in the system for the bullpen potentially. So it really just comes down to which veterans you see being at least decent to the extent where they can be competent in the bullpen, and then they can get either, if if they struggle immediately, you can let them go, bring up a young guy, or if they're solid, you can flip them at the deadline for a young prospect.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit it on the head. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
No,
Nick.
you're good.
Run with it.
Look, I mean, when it comes to battles in spring training, the margin of error is just not there. You have to throw strikes. I mean, I look for guys that are not working through control issues. Their mechanics are clean, and it goes to what Bannister and Katz are essentially trying to do. So I like guys that can keep hitters off balance. I like guys with a lot of movement, that you're bringing out of the pen, that have life to their stuff, that obviously have pop, and they've got a strong arm. They can throw multiple pitches in those multiple situations because, you come in a pinch or when you got guys on, you got to have confidence. And, if it's a ground ball pitcher, that's great. Have that arsenal. So I think it's just what kind of collection they're trying to put together in the bullpen. But for me, during these times, man, it's simple stuff. It's, can you throw strikes? And can you throw consistently? And hopefully that gets figured out. And, and they've got enough warm bodies where, they can cobble something together.
Danny?
Yeah, I really don't have much to add, honestly. The one thing that I've said over and over again, and it's not news to anybody who's listening to any of our shows, and we talk about the bullpen is, sure, we've got a handful of guys that the White Sox have kind of picked up as veteran bullpen arms here recently, but the one place, where people complain about development in the White Sox system, uh, the one place you don't have to really worry about any type of complaints there is usually bullpen arms. I would like just to see some of these younger guys that have been homegrown talent make their way up and get an opportunity to at least get it doesn't necessarily have to be right away. Obviously there's going to be a handful of guys that are going to go down throughout the season. I just want to see next man up. Like, we've kind of been the theme of the show today is, giving some guys some opportunities, and I hope that the White Sox don't waste those opportunities on these veterans that have been around baseball for a while just because they're veterans. I want to see some of those younger arms get an opportunity, and that's one of the places the White Sox have been able to excel.
Yeah, I agree. That's the bullpen's generally one of the places where they generally do okay by themselves without picking anything up, and they picked up a couple of guys that could possibly be quality arms, and we know that Bannister is one of those guys who likes to turn around guys' careers. So maybe we see some of that magic this season. As far as the
ultimately, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say I think they learned their lesson with spending money on Joe Kelly and Kendall Graveman instead of getting a right fielder 2 years ago. So it's like the bullpen is something where you don't need to spend money. You can find some diamonds in the rough. You can develop some solid guys in the farm system, and it will be fine. It might not be the best bullpen. It's probably going to be a pretty bad bullpen, but you'll find some pieces. You'll figure it out. You'll give Jordan Leisure a shot. You'll give Baroa a shot, and it'll work itself out ultimately. And it may not even make that much of a difference which one of those non-roster guys you end up deciding will make the bullpen.
Yeah.
Damn it, Elijah! I just put a cigarette out, and you had to go and throw in guys like Kelly. Anywho,
I think that was a La Russa mentality, right? I mean, the master bullpen, like that was his thing. How he was able to work a bullpen, and I have a feeling he said, "Look, this is what I want," and they did it. Crazy.
Yeah, I think the formula of spending 30% of your payroll on the bullpen has, while I didn't mind some of the pickups, it seems like maybe the ratio was a hair off on that. It would be nice to see them, spend some of that money on positional players. So the minor league guys that the White Sox invited, Adam Hackenberg, Carlos Perez, Edgar Caro, Tim Elko, Colson Montgomery, and Zach Remillard on the positional side. And then for the pitching side, you got Kai Bush, Jonathan Cannon, Frazier Ellard, Jordan Leisure, Nick Nastrini, Edgar Navarro, Padilla, forgetting the first name because he pitched so well last year for the White Sox to a 2 point something whip last year. Nicholas Padilla, and then Lane Ramsey, who we also saw of 6'9" fame. So, who are you guys excited to see get a shot in the minor? From these minor league guys. For me personally, I'm excited to see Elko get some run and see what he can do. Even if it is just in spring training in Arizona where the ball flies. I'm all for seeing him hit a 500-foot home run. But I will kick it to you guys. Elijah, who are you looking for?
Yeah, I touched on this earlier. I don't need to go too deep into it. Nastrini and Ellard are the two guys in terms of pitching and Leisure as well, like I just mentioned. I think all three of those guys will be major league pieces pretty soon. So just seeing how they can handle some, advanced hitters in spring training is going to be good. I think those three especially are really going to be pieces for the major league team pretty soon. I think, there's some other exciting pieces here and there. Obviously, Colson will be fun to watch. I think seeing how Caro kind of works with some of the major league level pitchers is going to be exciting because a big focus for him when I talked to him in Birmingham and I got to see him work a lot of his focus right now is on his receiving and how he receives and how he kind of works with pitchers because he's a bat first guy. His defense has gotten better and better. So I'm just excited to see him work with some of the big league talent in terms of the pitchers and see how he's kind of able to work behind the plate with them because I do think he is the future of the catching position. And I think that from what I saw, a lot of pitchers really liked and working with him and trusted him. So I'm curious to see how that carries over with some of the major league pitchers. And then beyond that, I think, just continuing to see what we get from Colson, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest thing everybody's gonna be watching is where's Colson at in his development because he's not big league ready right now. But it's kind of the question of is he big league ready later this season or is it still not going to be till 2025? So I think that's kind of what you're going to be looking for in spring training with him is like, does he look like there's a world where he's a big league player this year or is he still a full year away? I can kind of see it going either way right now, honestly. I think the team's going to want to call him up later in the season, but I don't want them rushing him, in which case, if you see him struggle in spring training and you can see his swing not quite where it needs to be, there's a chance, he ends up being 2025 instead of late 24.
Nick?
I mean, this is your power alley, guys. I trust actually what you guys spend a lot of time looking at these prospects and James Fox and so many others here for Future Sox. I am a pitcher guy. I do like to pay attention to arms and especially future arms. But when we talk, we've talked a lot about like Moncada this is probably going to be it for Moncada. And maybe you could say that about Jimenez. So in your mind, and maybe Danny, you want to take this, and then we could look at it a little bit. Like, is there the future third baseman right now in this organization that needs to be looked at? Like where are we looking to fill some of these spots moving forward after this season?
Well, so it's been talked about a little bit if Colson's going to stick at shortstop. And then obviously, Brian Ramos is a name that's been tossed around a lot the last couple of years as well too. I think between those two guys, the future third baseman is somewhere in the system. I don't think it's going to be somebody that they're going to, at least not in the next couple of seasons, go out and start looking for. I think they're going to give one of these two kids an opportunity to come up and prove themselves. And like, Elijah said earlier in the show tonight, even if it doesn't go well right away, a lot of these guys have the makeup and the the ceiling that is going to allow them to at least afford them some time to get an opportunity that's not too short, which has kind of happened over the years with some of these White Sox prospects that have come up. They give them a shot. They get Ian and I have talked about this on shows past where guys come up and they go through that slump after about 85 to 100 at bats or so, and then it takes another 85 to 100 at bats to kind of make the adjustment that the rest of the league has made on them. So when we talk about third baseman, I think those two guys are going to get a full opportunity to at least play the position
Yeah.
at the major league level at some point. And as far as like pitching arms, there are some interesting names in the system. Taylor's a guy that doesn't, I think, get talked about a lot. But he's not ready at the moment. Probably won't hear from him anytime soon. But there's a wealth of talent, like Elijah again pointed out earlier in the show, in these last couple of draft classes, that you know, yeah, Ellie De La Cruz. That's kind of funny. But that's exactly the type of opportunity that some of these guys should be given. You know, Ellie kind of came up and did his thing almost immediately, though, right? I mean, the guy just looked like a seasoned veteran, and there were people giving him MVP chance, right out the gate. So I'm hoping for that kind of thing from Colson. I'm hoping he can clean up his defense a little bit, but the bat plays for sure. The
Going
bat definitely
going
plays.
back a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah,
going back a little
I
bit
saw I
on
saw
your
that
question
look,
there, Nick.
Elijah. I saw the look.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
No, I am pretty confident that Brian Ramos and Colson Montgomery will be the left side of the infield for a substantive while. I can say that with some confidence there. I don't think Colson's moving. I think he's going to continue getting better at shortstop. I think there's not that elite defensive shortstop upside with him, but the arm is there. His reaction times are getting better. He's just got to continue to clean up his footwork a little bit. Being a bigger guy, I think the footwork is something he's putting a lot of time into, and he looks more and more rangy every season that I watch him. And I think Ramos has become not only a solid third baseman, but a good third baseman. I think there was talk about Ramos being, moved over to second base potentially, or even having to play first base in the future a year or two ago. I think Ramos is one of the more well-rounded players in the system right now, and it's really just going to come down to how much he can hit and how much he can get hit for contact, not just power. He's got the power in the tank. He's got the arm strength for sure to play third base, and his movement at third base has gotten a lot better. I think from what I've seen from him, he's gone in the last 2 years from a below average third baseman to somebody who grades out as a slightly above average third baseman defensively. So I really do think that Brian Ramos is the guy at third base come 2025. And I think this year is just going to be the year for him to sit back and do the best he can to develop in Birmingham and Charlotte. And there's a chance he's up at the end of the season, really. But I think going into 2025, there will be pretty much no questions about those two starting at shortstop and third base, respectively.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, I've heard Ramos, and for me, who I obviously I pay way more attention to what's happening at the big league level. In spring training, I do like to look at the future. Like, well, what are we looking at? Because this person or this person or this person, this is it for them. They're going to be gone, and who's the next man up? So, this is the time to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now, second base, on the other hand, I have no idea who will be playing there come 2025, and I cannot make any guarantees about any of the prospects in the system filling in at second base. I really don't feel confident all that much about anybody within the system at that spot, so I think second base is going to be somewhere that we're going to continue to just try things out and see what sticks, really.
yeah. As far as second base goes, I would like to think that Popeye's going to be a guy that could take that spot. The only issue, the only worry with him is, whether he is too aggressive and the plate approach doesn't work. Defensively, I know he can hack second base. The guy plays a great second base. And the power, with his bat is nice as well. Just the issue is, are we going to be able to hold a decent, bat to ball so he can manage to stick there? And you're not going to find that out until you give him some at bats up there, or he proves in AAA that he can't hack it.
Right. I think
So
I think
you
there's a
mean
chance.
so?
There's a
Oh,
chance
go
he
ahead.
clicks. Yeah, and there's also a chance that I do see his profile kind of fitting into the mold of a defense speed fourth infielder type of role. I can see it working at second base, but I also can see him just never quite hitting enough to be an everyday player and being someone that can run a lot and can play good defense at second and short and can run into some home runs here and there, but ultimately ends up being kind of that infield utility bench piece. I don't mind that. That's not a bad player to have, right? That's somebody who could be useful on a major league roster. But to figure out which version of that or what he is at all, you need to give him some at bats. And he's old enough. He's been in the minor leagues enough. He's proven enough. So I think come mid season, it's at least worth giving him a shot. But I do kind of see his profile potentially fitting into more of that bench infielder role.
Yeah, no, I mean that's like I said. There's no way to tell until he's getting some more at bats. The one thing that he is very good at hitting. The bat to ball is good. Just I'm wondering if the approach of being too it's going to create outs by being too aggressive, and
And
who knows.
that's something you can really see, not to harp on the prospect side of stuff too much, because I know that's not what we're here for, but that's something you can really see throughout the whole system, honestly. I mean, there's there's a lot of hitters right now in the White Sox system who the results are good. They can hit the ball really hard, and they have that ability and that bat speed, but they don't have a matured approach enough to be able to know when to pick and choose their moments. I mean, you look at a guy like Tim Elko, who, yes, the numbers are great. He had a lot of home runs. His batting average, his on base percentage was high because he got on base a lot. Elko struck out at a 37% clip last year. That's just not going to cut it as you continue to rise up through the system and rise up to higher levels of the minor leagues, right? And that's the same for a lot of other guys. And that doesn't mean they're bad hitters, but there is a theme with a lot of these White Sox hitters, especially the power guys in the minor leagues, where they don't have the patience to really tap into everything they could be. So I think that's going to be an emphasis for a lot of these players, and it's just going to be something that we need to continue seeing those improvements. And whichever prospects can improve in that area are going to be the ones that end up becoming big league pieces in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Ian,
Yeah.
can we address these last couple of comments in
Yeah,
the
I'm bringing.
chat here real
Yeah, I
quick?
wanted to wait until he was done first.
No, I
All
know.
right. All
I
right.
wasn't sure if you wanted to move on to something else because I think
No,
both of
I
these
think it's
comments
I think
are.
this is good stuff. Is who do you guys think makes opening day roster as the fifth infield? Sosa, Popeye, Shoemaker, somebody else? Why don't you go ahead and start with that, Elijah? Because I'm assuming that it's probably going to be a minor league guy, but let's hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, that could go anyway, to be honest. I think that's really up for grabs. I don't think it's Popeye off the bat, just because I think he showed a little bit of struggle at the end of the season last year in Birmingham and then Charlotte, where I think they're going to want to have him in the minors a little bit longer. Sosa seems like the most, experienced pick, just because he did have that taste last year, even though he didn't do great. So I think maybe you open the season with Sosa and you see what he has. I don't mind Shoemake. From what I've seen, I haven't watched him nearly as much as these other guys, obviously because they just acquired him this offseason. But I know he's got really good defensive ratings for the most part, and someone who he hasn't really gotten the chance yet because of the Braves being way more loaded than the White Sox are in the infield. So I wouldn't mind seeing Shoemake. I think realistically it's probably Sosa to start, and if he continues to do what he did at the end of last season, then you flip over to a Shoemaker or a Popeye pretty soon.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I've been a big fan of Lenine pretty much since they brought him in. It feels like he's been part of the White Sox organization for like a century at this point, and he's still pretty young because he came up so early. Well, actually came into the system early, I should say. But I'm kind of hoping that maybe he's got the mental mindset now that another off season after getting up to MLB speed last year. Sometimes that's all you need is a reset as a young guy, and I'm kind of hoping that we see the Lenine Sosa that we've seen. It really good Lenine Sosa at times in the minor league system. So I agree with Elijah on it. I think that he should probably be the guy to start the season. Although again, I'm also a pretty big fan of Popeye as well. So uh, I don't know, man. It is kind of going to be a toss up. It might be one of those things where we talk about how positional battles don't really mean a whole lot in spring training when you look at a roster most of the time because you can kind of break down just by you don't have to be a genius. You can break down who's pretty much going to be the guy. When you look at a roster, but when we're looking at a fourth infielder or a bench guys, these are going to be the places that maybe where we're going to see those positional battles kind of shake out in spring training and who really impresses. So, all of that stuff's kind of up in the air and will probably solve itself here in the next few weeks.
I'm just going to say one thing and then kick it over to Nick. One thing that I will say is one thing that is of great interest to me is seeing Jose Rodriguez actually being healthy at the start of this season for once. That's going to be a huge thing for me because him starting off with pretty nasty injuries for 2 seasons in a row, I feel like that impacted his start for the last couple of years, and that as you look as the season goes on, I felt like the numbers started creeping up and up and up. About a month and a half, 2 months into the season. So I'm looking forward to seeing if he can jump out to a quick start instead of kind of slowly ramping it up over a month and a half or so. Go ahead, Nick.
Nobody mentioned Danny Mendick. I'm really surprised by that. I assumed, honestly, I kind of assumed going into spring training that it was like Lenine Sosa's to lose. Like they're going to kind of just start there, and then he could lose the battle. Like he looks miserable at the plate, like no discipline once again. He just hasn't improved. So that's just my take on that. But this is where Hanser Alberto like came out of nowhere last year. And it's like Hanser Alberto won the job and Lurie Garcia was kicked to the curb. I mean, these are the strange things that happen in spring training. And then look at what happened to Hanser Alberto. He was the king of the Cactus League, and it was short lived. So something to watch for. I hope it's a guy like a Sosa or Rodriguez that has been around the system and just finally like it unlocks for them, and we get to see all the stuff that we were not just promised, but that we know is in there, and it's just been untapped.
There's a world where either of those guys could at least be something. And I think that you're exactly right. It would be nice to see one of those two, especially, take that leap forward and show like they are a major league piece, whether it's a major league piece in a utility form or eventually this main second baseman for the season, because that they will have the chance to earn that spot. So it would be really cool to see either of those guys take a next step forward. But I think, like you said, I don't think you're wrong on that assessment at all, that it is Sosa's job to lose right now because he had the time to be up last year and make adjustments based on that this offseason.
The only thing that sucks for both of these guys is they are typically guys that need those consistent at bats, and coming off the bench is going to kind of hurt both of them, I think.
Let's see.
That's a big part of it, Danny. I mean, that's a great point. That's a mindset, isn't it? It's like just the ability to do that is not easy. And yeah, I mean, when you're sitting around cold and you can't get into a groove, both of those guys, they need it. You're going to go from probably getting you're going to get some consistent at bats in Arizona, right? Because you're the one that needs to really prove something. And then you're going to go to playing sporadically. That is a great point.
Any of you guys got something that you've got burning on your mind that you need to talk about?
No. Gavin Sheets make the roster?
I personally, I'm gonna say no. I know that he's been the guy who's come up with all the catchphrases and interviews where all sorts of motivational posters are being made. But I just don't think that the skill level's there, and I don't feel like he is. I don't feel like the White Sox roster is at a point where it can support keeping a guy like that on the roster. So that's my opinion.
No, I think he's next man up when Andrew Vaughn's back locks up on him.
Hey, don't bring that negativity into this conversation, Danny.
Yeah, we're positive here today, Danny.
He played through the pain last year. I'm not knocking the guy at all.
Andrew Vaughn is going to have such a decent year. It's going to be ridiculous how decent.
I hope he does. I hope
he's going to be so average. You'll see.
Decent.
It's going to be an amazingly average season. Oh man! Hey, my thoughts on Sheets. I don't think he fits into the mindset or the way that Grifol wants to play or gets, and I hope somebody. I hope somebody makes it obvious with the type of spring that they have. And, and I hope it's not, and I'm not looking for Sheets to get hurt or anything. Absolutely not. I hope Sheets is healthy and he has a great spring, but I hope someone just beats him out, and I think I'm done as a fan from that experience.
I'm with you on that one. I think it also opens up more possibilities. Like you mentioned Danny Mendick a few minutes ago. Danny Mendick doesn't need to be the backup infielder. He could be the utility guy if you
True.
don't have a
Very
roster
true.
spot
Yeah.
being held by a right field, first base, can't play defense guy. So it's
Yep.
like if you don't have a Sheets there, then you have the option to go Maldonado with fourth outfielder, a true backup infielder like a Sosa, and then a utility guy like a Mendick who can play some corner outfield, who can play some infield, or there's other guys that could make that roster spot as well. But I think not having Sheets in the equation opens up a lot more possibilities with the bench and allows the team to be a little bit more creative with mixing and matching matchups and platooning and different situations like that.
Can Danny Mendick put the catcher's gear on?
I thought
He was
he
the backup
was
catcher,
in
the
line.
emergency
he
guy.
was.
Yeah,
He was
has.
the
That's what I
emergency
thought.
third
Emergency
catcher.
guy.
Yep.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yep.
So there you go. You got a third catcher on the roster.
Yeah,
'Cause he's a magic man.
yeah, as my son likes to call him, the emergency backup catcher. So I'm just gonna throw this out there. See, the difference here is that O'Hearn didn't come from the White Sox, so I kind of I kind of don't see him turning it around anywhere else. Usually, when guys are bad here, next place they go, they're even worse. So that's just my opinion on that thing. But maybe somebody finds a utility for him elsewhere, but I don't see it personally.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to stop for the evening, gentlemen. Hopefully. Yeah, FutureSox.net. You can find all of our material, written and podcasts. Elijah Evans, thank you for being on tonight. Thanks
Appreciate
for coming
you guys.
over. You have, on Friday, you have an interview with White Sox prospect Edric Felix. You want to give a quick rundown on that real quick before I kick
that
it
was
out
great.
here?
It was a really cool interview. I'm hoping to relaunch some of my player interviews. I kind of had a bunch in the fall after the season, and then kind of gave people their time over the holidays and all that time in the off season. So I'm getting back into that stuff now. Edric Felix was a great interview. He talked about kind of growing up in Puerto Rico and what baseball was like there, and how his transition over to the States, and it's just all things about how he became the player he is today and the person he is today. It was a really awesome interview, one of my favorite I've done actually with a White Sox prospect. So that's coming out on Friday, and then looking into the future, stay tuned with all different interviews coming up. In addition to the stuff I'll have in spring training, because I'm hoping to talk to a lot of these guys that we talked about today. So
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys have not been over to any of our podcast platforms that you can get stuff from and found Elijah's interview series, go and do so. There's been a lot of good ones. The Nastrini one was particularly awesome. Jacob Burke also good stuff. There's been a lot of stuff that's been good. So looking forward to that series kicking off again this year, and that will be happening on Friday. My name is Ian Eskridge at Daily White Sox on Twitter. Nick Murawski at Nick_GGTB. Danny Miller at Danny Miller FS. Elijah Evans at Elijah EV8. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out tonight. You can find this in podcast form on any podcast platform that you choose. You can also find this in video form, again, on demand on YouTube. It will also be available on our Twitch video feed as well. You can support us via Patreon if you like the content that we have been putting out here lately. You can find a link for that on our site. Thank you so much for hanging out tonight and coming in the chat. We appreciate you guys. And for the Major League Baseball Future Sox podcast here, we all appreciate you. Have a great night, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks.
Before we go, I just want to mention one last thing. If anybody was wondering, we are all four of us here on this screen are in the best shape of our lives to going into the season here. So be prepared for some great content.
That's not true.
Is that accurate?
That is inaccurate. All right, so you guys have a great night, and we will talk to you guys next week. You have a good night. Thanks. Bye.